The major achievement of infancy is the development of attachment. But when we talk about school age children, the major achievement of childhood is developing a positive self concept. When we ask ourselves the question, who am I? All of the thoughts and the feelings about ourselves that are associated with answering that question are referred to as our self concept. Our self concept includes our identity, which can break down by our gender identity, our sexual orientation, our traits, how we compare ourselves to other people, the groups with which we feel we belong and we identify. By the time we've reached like 8 to 10 years old, our self concept is relatively stable. We've started to figure out that we are good and skillful in some ways, but not in others. And hopefully, we are by that point developing a positive self concept and that might result in us being more confident and optimistic and assertive and more competent in social situations. So the goal is the development of this positive self concept during our school age years, during childhood. And that begs the question that researchers have asked as far as, what can parents do to help their children develop positive self concepts? The most heavily researched aspect of parenting is how and to what extent parents try to exert control over their children. Diana Baumrind is who we're going to discuss right now. Her research identified 4 parenting styles. It's very important to note that when we're discussing these parenting styles, all of the research is suggesting correlational relationships between these types of parenting styles and various outcomes for children, which we'll talk about a little bit more as we're finishing up this video. But we're basically looking at parenting on 2 axes. How much support are parents providing or caregivers, and how much control are parents or caregivers exerting over their children. So a permissive parent might be highly supportive, but makes very few rules. So I trust you'll do the right thing. Permissive parents are unrestraining. All right, so they're making few demands, they're setting few limits, and they're also not really using much in the way of punishment. Uninvolved parents, or sometimes this is referred to as negligent parents, are, again, setting very few rules, not closely monitoring the children, but also not actively offering a whole lot of support, which is what differentiates them from permissive parents. Okay, so again, they're not demanding, but they're also not very responsive. They're inattentive, they can be careless, and they're really not even trying to have a close relationship with the child, Baumrind said. An authoritarian parent, think of when you hear the word authoritarian, you might think of a dictator, right? Like an authoritarian ruler. Sets lots of rules and closely monitors, but offers very little support of the child and really doesn't encourage any kind of dialogue, doesn't give any room for the child to have any kind of input as far as these rules are concerned. You'll do as I say. Why? Because I said so. I know my mom always had a sign in our house growing up and it said, "I'm the mom, that's why." And that's basically how she parented in a very authoritarian kind of way. Baumrind said that potentially the most effective parenting style is the authoritative style, where a parent is both exerting control by setting rules, but also offering lots of support to the child. So this is a very communicative form of parenting, where the parent is setting expectations, but also giving the child some input. They're encouraging open discussions. They allow exceptions to the rules. And again, Baumrind said this is really the ideal. So I'm stressing again that the outcomes that we're about to discuss for each of these parenting styles are based on really correlational research. So we're saying that research have identified these 4 parenting styles which have been associated with varying outcomes. That's not to say that authoritarian parenting style is going to cause children to be anxious and insecure, but research has found a correlation there at least. Authoritarian children, or excuse me, authoritative parents, research has shown children tend to be confident, self-reliant, enthusiastic, happier, more successful. Could that be because the parent is setting limits but also giving lots of support and helping the child make the right decisions on their own? Perhaps, but again, this is correlational research. Negligent parenting styles are associated with kids that have poor academic and social outcomes, and permissive styles are associated with children that may be exhibiting less mature behavior. They might be more impulsive, more dependent and demanding. And it's interesting because I've had students say to me in the past, well, I don't understand if the permissive parents are letting the kids kind of make their own decisions, wouldn't that make them like less dependent, more independent, and more mature? Well, no, because as children, we've talked about the fact that your prefrontal cortex is underdeveloped, right? Like you need help and you need guidance and support at this age and throughout childhood to help you to come to make the right decisions, right? You need to be taught to an extent how to make the right decisions, and that type of support is not being offered by permissive and negligent parenting styles. But there are other factors that might be influencing all of the outcomes that we talked about, right? I mean, I think about within your own families, if you have any siblings, can you think about ways that your caregivers have responded differently to you and your siblings? I know that my parents were very different with me than they were with my siblings, and I see that sometimes even with me and my own children, because children are born with certain temperaments. Some children, I was saying in a previous video, are born just genetically predisposed to being more easygoing and others to being more difficult. And so a child's temperament can definitely influence the way that a parent parents them. Kids that just happen to be more agreeable by nature or socially mature or easygoing, they might prompt different parental responses than children who tend to be more disagreeable, less socially mature, and just more difficult overall. So temperament can absolutely be something that influences the way that parents parent. And we have to think about genetic predispositions in another way as well. Because maybe competent parents will produce more competent children, right? And so they're just, in this case, sharing genes that predispose them to more social competence. So that might be even kind of another third variable that's at work here, influencing parenting styles as well as these potential outcomes for the children.